What's good, y'all? It's your boy Herb,
And it's your girl Mo.
and welcome to our soon-to-be world-renowned podcast, Young, Black, and Figuring It Out. What up, though?
What it do?
Whatever we tell it. You feel me? Okay. How you feeling?
I'm feeling amazing.
Are you?
Yes.
Ooh, you know, amazing. My favorite one.
I know. I
Good.
try.
You know what I said I'm gonna switch it up to from now on?
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal. Yeah, I'm feeling phenomenal, y'all. You're gonna take that. Good.
Love it.
You know why I'm excited?
I do this time. I do.
Why am I excited?
We have a special guest.
We got a special guest in the building to talk about a special topic. Let's clap it up for the special guest. Pastor Gerald coming in the building.
What up, y'all?
Go ahead, yeah. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yo, wait. That intro is so fire, though.
We gonna take it.
That's like, yeah, that was fire.
We appreciate that.
Thank you.
But glad to be here. I serve as the campus pastor at Roberts Wesleyan University.
Yeah.
I also serve as the pastor of a congregation in Chicago,
Yep.
Mount Carmel, on the west side of the city there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, glad to be here with you all.
Yeah, we glad to have you.
Yes.
That's gonna be great. So yeah, today's conversation is a follow up to one of our another one of our great episodes, important episodes. People really liked it, and that was dealing with church trauma. Right? Was the episode like how do you deal with that? And I think that just to kind of talk about that topic a little bit is just the idea that a lot of folks have experienced trauma in their life, and some of that stems either within the church, is from some of the principles or philosophies that came from the church. And so we just want to explore that and all of that really
Right.
and see how that impacts people, right?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Okay. All right. Good. So you want to jump right into it?
Dive in.
Okay, let's do that.
Let's go.
Let's do it. So, so first here, I got this question written down because I think it was a good way to start. So you've had multiple years experience as a pastor, understanding theology, all of that, and just a personal, like being a human being, right? Being a person in the church. Can you kind of share your journey, the lessons you've learned, and maybe some of the positive and negative impacts that your experience in the church has had?
So my experience is unique because I'm a PK.
Mm-hmm.
So the year I
Pastor's
was born,
kid, folks who don't know.
Yeah, pastor's kid. So the year I was born was actually the day, well, not the day, but it was the same year that my father became a pastor.
Wow.
And so it's a unique, my context in the church was a small black Pentecostal congregation
Gotcha.
that was formed out of the Great Migration.
Mm.
And so
Wow.
I feel like that context is important.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about church hurt, you're talking about hurt folks that's forming
Right.
a church, right? So the trauma is, you've got folks who are already experiencing trauma of moving from the South.
Yeah.
In particular, the founder of our church came from Mississippi.
Wow.
He was also part of the civil rights movement.
Wow.
And they had to get him out of Mississippi because the Klan was coming to kill him.
Wow.
Wow.
So they got him out in time, and actually the Klan showed up to his house and shot up all of their livestock.
Wow.
So he got out in time and, started the church in Chicago. His family moved to Chicago from Mississippi. And my mom, who knew that family, she later migrated to Chicago to find some work. Met my pops, who migrated from Alabama,
Wow.
to find work because they were sharecroppers in the South, and all of that. And so you have these leaders who are leading in the midst of serious trauma happening to the community.
Yes.
They start a church, and so that church becomes like a safe place in the community.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was born into that context. So came up in the church. Felt like I was in church morning, noon, night, every day of the week, all night prayer meetings, all of that type of stuff, church at home, first one to get there, last one to leave.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
church is very familiar to me,
Yeah.
And it was, I can say as a kid, I've got a lot of happy memories
Yeah.
because I had a lot of friends, a lot of young people my age growing up.
Yeah.
We got in trouble together.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you eating candy in church, sister or brother so-and-so tell you can't eat that. You got the ushers with the white gloves who stand by you and just embarrass you in church.
Yeah.
Or you get disciplined by somebody.
Yeah.
So all of that,
Man, that is great. Now I I cannot just skip over that great history that you just showed.
Right.
That was such deep, real history, and the way you frame that, which is when you think about church hurt, you think about hurt people building the church, and figuratively building the church, right? And so, just that background, I think really, because I hadn't heard it shaped in that way before. That was
Right.
really good. How do you think? So thinking about that, like that context, and how did that shape the way people, I would say, help foster kind of the environment in the church? Just that kind of background that you mentioned.
Yeah. So number one, I would say. I want to be careful how I say this, but there's a lot to it. So number one, let me say family.
Right.
Very family core. So when you get to church, you're gonna be there all day,
Right.
because you kicking it with family.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And you probably gonna eat afterwards. All of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So time really, it matters, but it don't matter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's why you could be in church for 4 hours or
Yeah.
whatever. But I think too. It's the safe place in the community. You're dealing with stress everywhere else in the world, pressure. You might not be esteemed. You might not be treated with dignity. But when you come there, your stories are celebrated.
Yeah.
You're celebrated. That's
Yeah.
why you wear your best, right? Because
Right.
you can't wear your best anywhere else, but to church you could wear your best.
Mm.
And then as a kid too, there was always that rigid, you got to be on your best behavior, that
Gotcha.
type deal too. So, and I should say too, for our community, they were very intelligent people,
Yeah.
but they weren't educated.
Gotcha.
So my parents, their highest level of education was high school, and that
Yeah.
was probably the average.
Gotcha.
But they did push us to do our best
Gotcha.
in education. So there
Yeah.
were many who were above me and my peers. We were pushed to go on and get our
Absolutely.
education.
Yeah,
So,
to go further.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Was that your experience too, Money Mo? Like as far as like in the church, because he mentioned Pentecostal, and I immediately looked at you
Yep.
like, oh, that sounds like your background
Got
right
Pentecostal
there.
roots
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Hey.
Grew up
Okay.
right up in a Pentecostal church, and it was run by majority Caribbean people.
Okay.
So, I'm from Brooklyn, and the area we lived in
Brooklyn.
was majority Caribbean, and it's called now Little Caribbean. I did not know that until I went back to visit.
Okay.
But yeah, it was very much you put on your Sunday's best. I mean, the hats were nobody, no
Yeah.
joke. There
Yeah.
was women with heels everywhere, and you still could, catch the spirit with
Yeah,
them
yeah.
heels up and down the aisle. It was
Yeah.
an experience, and we were there every single Sunday. If my mother did not go, who was going? I was going. Me and my sister had no choice. The church van was coming, and we had to go to church every time. There was no way we could get out of it.
Yeah.
And that heavy preaching, Pentecostal preaching is
Absolutely.
Yeah.
very much, you got to do what's right or you're going to hell, and that was the the majority of the focus. But catching the Holy Spirit, it was a mix of great and hard. I would say, and I had family in there, aunts, uncle.
Yeah.
My uncle used to play the drums. They didn't even really live in Brooklyn. Most of them were from Manhattan, but everyone came there. My cousins, so yeah.
And I would say the women had it particularly hard.
Yes, we
Because
did.
I'm assuming you had that holiness background.
What?
So women had to wear skirts.
Mm.
They had to be below the knees.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't wear open toe shoes. That was my context.
Yeah,
no
yeah.
makeup.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
and they were very strict. It wasn't one of those things. This is what I feel led to do. But it was like, no, this is it. If you want to be saved,
Yes.
This is what you got to do.
this is what you got to do.
This.
Got
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a young guy, that didn't bother me, because I didn't have to do it. You know what I mean?
Right,
But as you get
right.
older, you're kind of like, oh, that's kind of rough.
It was so ingrained, I didn't realize it until one time my sister wore pants. It was this beautiful outfit that she wore. It was so pretty. And my uncle was like, what are you doing wearing pants then? We in church. And I mean, we were all like, and then I looked it back and I was like, oh my gosh, I've only ever worn dresses. I've only ever worn skirts. And under no circumstances have I ever worn pants. Unless it was maybe a Friday youth thing and you could wear jeans or,
Yeah.
Other than that, you had to, and I mean, modest. You couldn't show any, you had to make sure your outfit wasn't too tight. There was never any makeup.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put on makeup, and I see why. It's very much purity culture. You have to hold yourself as a lady. If you're sitting in the front row, you sit with your legs a certain way. You have a shawl or whatever to cover your legs. Yeah, it's very prim. Prim popper.
I appreciate. Well, first I appreciate when you do your accent, your Caribbean accent. I love that
Yeah,
because you bring us into the culture when you do that. So I value it. But then, yeah, it sounds like a. It's funny. When we were thinking about this episode, you talked about like, can we get into like the gender, right? Some of like that trauma. So you bringing it up, it's like, oh, perfect timing.
Yes.
Because we opted to not put that on here, but say it probably come up naturally,
Right,
and it
right.
came up.
Yeah.
But so we'll talk about that. And so, but it sounds like communal is a thing because it doesn't necessarily mean happy all the time, but it was a communal experience, right? Because you know families are messy, but you mentioned family, and that's really what it was,
Right.
and that was a space of safety in a way, which makes a lot of sense. And then, but in that community, the community's rules created some
Yes.
trauma, especially around. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but also for you, I mean, I know you weren't raised in a Pentecostal church, but
Yeah.
we know the rules of your church as well. You were raised in the church.
Nah, it was. I mean, I'll say it wouldn't be as strict as like what I've later experienced as kind of like the Pentecostal background, but like the Church of Christ, for sure. It definitely strict. Like certain things around, especially around your salvation, right? Like we there's like a verse in the Bible that's like sing unto the Lord with spiritual hymns, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't use instruments, Church of Christ. And I remember like asking somebody like, yeah, nah, we want to risk our souls. I'm like, instruments? Like the drums? You gonna get us? You know what I'm saying? But that's the theology, right?
Yeah.
And so that was extremely strict. But also especially around gender, right? I talked to my mom about this the other day because I had went back to the church I was at, and it's like we went in, the woman cooked, served the food, cleaned, all that, because that was kind of, and no women preach. And me having expanded kind of my experience, right, in different denominations of theologies or views of that, it was just hard for me to get back into that. Like, I can wash the dish or two.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to make my own plate in there. But that stemmed from
yeah.
some deep-rooted beliefs of, like, the way people interpreted the Bible and that for sure. And so, yeah, those things also shaped kind of my experience. And it was a great time of community, too.
Right.
Like, great memories, like, with folks who I grew up with. But there was also some of those things too that you all mentioned that you kind of look back and say, how do I feel about that now? Type of thing, right? So no, that's great. Wow, deep. So connectivity in some of that.
I gotta say though, Church of Christ, y'all be rocking it. Y'all may not have any instruments, but
the rhythm, the claps and the rhythm.
When the audience members when the congregation can sing and the harmonies. Ooh, when I say I used to be, because I ended up going to Church of Christ at one point too for a good amount of years.
That's right. I'm tripping.
Yeah,
you know that. Yeah.
We were church hoppers. I went to a lot of churches.
All over the
When
place.
I tell you, the singing used to be on point. Because I was like, where's the organ? Not even an organ. The organ was a big deal.
You gotta have the organ, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Man, and then the bass, people got the bass.
Yeah.
Man, it's rocking. So, question with that. So we all, especially you mentioned kind of like that, the influence in the black community from the church and the reasons why. Like that was a place where, and I like how you describe why people were their best, like, and why people wanted to come and show up. Like you could be esteemed in that place. If in other places you weren't esteemed. Like, I love that. And so historically, I think the church has been an influential place in the black community, right? How have you seen the church use that influence, right, from like your journey, what you've seen, both in a positive way and maybe not so positive way?
So let me start off with a positive. I remember, so growing up in Chicago, I'm a 80s baby, 90s teen, but I remember the schools went on strike, and we had some educators in our church. And so it was a long strike.
Yeah.
And I remember somehow it getting determined by the church, well, we're going to bring our babies to the church every week. We're going to make sure they get here, and we're going to run a school for them.
Wow.
And so we're going to make sure they don't fall behind. And so whatever they did to hook up that malto-meal or grits upstairs in the kitchen, they served us. We had breakfast. We had lunch. And so they took care of us and made sure we were able to maintain our education. There was always this sense of pride around education.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a positive influence. I think another positive influence that I think gets taken for granted sometimes is that at that time the black church was the center of community, and we heard our stories. We'd have Black history programs, and I would even say that we read the scriptures from a black perspective, right? Always resonated with Israel being in captivity. Like, that's our story. We know that, 400 years, that's our story.
Right.
But I would say as I started to get older, especially into high school, and for the Pentecostal tradition, it's kind of separated because holiness is this thing, right? Holiness, you got to be separate from the world. And I think what gets lost is, but how do you make impact in the world? And holding this thing of you've got to be separate. So I remember let's say high school, Malcolm X came out.
Yeah.
And, it was just so fire, especially the scene where Malcolm is in prison and he's arguing with the preacher, about biblical stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
After that, there were many of my friends and peers who knew that I was a Christian, and so they want to have that conversation with you. Well, so which is the black man's religion, And so you start to get into those debates, and then I would have friends who would come to church with me, and they were like, "All right, this is good." But at that time, so many black young men were being drawn to the Nation of Islam.
Absolutely.
And what I saw in the Nation of Islam at that time that I admired and respected is that they were in the hood.
Yes.
They were in the projects. They were like, if there was violence occurring in the projects and the police were too afraid to go in, you would see the FOI, the Fruit of Islam, you would see them in those areas, the men there. And they're like, okay, we're going to do what we got to do to keep it safe. And you would see so many black males would look at that and they would say, that's what it's about. Whereas when you would come to the church, all you would see is maybe deacons and they doing church stuff, having coffee in the back, or maybe, doing those type of things. But then you're thinking like, okay, so what are we doing out in the presence of the community? Right. And so I for me, that was just kind of like this negative. It was negative in terms of, okay, I grew up with a lot of men, a lot of good role models who treated their families well. But in terms of social impact, didn't see a lot of that, you know?
And that's Agreed. So fascinating because that's kind of the roots. Like when I think back to some of the most phenomenal leaders for us, right? Especially around, like there's multiple levels and layers of impact in different movements. But I think about civil rights. I think about folks who were in the church and the church had a voice in that, and thinking about how over time, and we had talked about this before, someone actually got upset at me because I said that. I'm like, the church kind of lost its voice. I remember one of the pastors we used to work with was hot. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm out here. I'm in these streets. But I felt it though. But that's how I really experienced it. I remember one person at one point in time. You remember that? He was tight. But I remember one person, and the reason why I felt that is I remember going back home. And we were having that conversation about religion. And this is a time where I was kind of like a self-discovery around how I view faith and Christianity and religion and all of that. And someone had said something like, man, the only time, it's about church, the only time I see pastors is at weddings and funerals. And I'm like, hey, you know what? And that's kind of getting to your point about we got to show up, right? And are we missing that? So just one thing that you said might be like a con or a negative is how often do we show up in a place where people need us to be, instead of expecting them to come to us in the church,
True. And they don't necessarily, just speaking more generally, don't make it as inviting as it could be. And evangelism was a big thing, especially when I was growing up. And so they go out in the community and preach at people.
Yes.
And there came a point, as I got older, I was able to find my voice and speak to what bothered me. It fell on deaf ears, but I spoke anyway. And I struggled with the fact that they never took time out to get to know the person, where they are, and match and meet them where they are. There was a lack of empathy or care toward them and their situation, not knowing anything. And that bothered me to my core because I'm like, you don't know me. And you're trying to tell me I need to do this and act this way.
Absolutely.
With no context or understanding. And it's like, that's a huge issue I find now with the church because it had been influential, at least to me, as a youth especially. But that whole preaching of we're in the world, but we're not of the world. And I could not, and it was being a young person and a Christian is hard. Going through high school, it is hard. And, you know, it built a lot of confidence in me because I knew whose I was regardless, right?
Yeah.
But I was so separated from my peers and couldn't connect. And I never really had friends. Well, you know, I can't go back and say I have high school friends like you can say. It's like I had friends, but because they didn't go to church, they weren't allowed to be my friend. You know, because we didn't see the world the same way, I wasn't really allowed to engage with them. And that has bothered me for so long because I always thought, well, Jesus wouldn't do this. You know, if he was here right now, he would get to know you.
Yeah.
Like, how would he expect you to want to do anything with him if you don't know who he is and he doesn't know who you are? And that's been my biggest issue nowadays.
Yeah,
That's good.
That is, and to your point though, and that's the part that's almost like a jarring around this question is because what you mentioned about like the program folks ran when the schools went on strike, said we're gonna hold our own educate. Like that's the type of stuff that's impactful, right? That's the type of stuff that you know people can organize and do because you got people who care. But if we kind of create this wall around that and don't allow other folks to actually to engage, and kind of what you were saying is we can't really meet people where they are because we don't know where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what's going on, right? And so it's like to take the time to do that so people could experience some of the things that are going on. It's like, man, that's what folks, you know, we're not allowing that or making it as inviting as it could be. Knowing that we have so much to give and offer, right? So that's good. Yeah, that's valid. That's valid. So, I mean, I guess with that, well, before I even get to this next question, it's like, have you started to see efforts to kind of, especially like in your role, the spaces you're in or back home in Chicago, folks trying to get beyond that, right?
Absolutely. Shout out to Dr. John Perkins. I don't know if you all have heard of him, but he was a pastor from Mississippi, and he really started to live out this principle that we would call it incarnational ministry.
Yeah.
And the incarnation comes from the doctrine surrounding Jesus, that God came in the flesh to be among human beings. So he came up with this. He didn't come up with this concept, but he really drove it home of incarnational ministry.
Yeah.
Like God doesn't minister to people from far distance. He comes close.
Right.
And so what does it look like to be incarnated in the neighborhoods in which we minister?
Right.
And so I had the honor of being a part of a church in Fort Wayne. It was actually my first full-time job at a church. And this was a congregation that was probably 50-50 white and black, I would say. But the staff was primarily white. And at the time when I first arrived, it was only one other African-American black pastor on staff.
Yeah.
But what this church had did is they decided that we were going to figure out what we can do to be a blessing to this community. So what they did is they didn't assume that they knew what the needs were, right? So they went and they conducted a survey. They said, if we're going to be a blessing to this community, let's conduct a survey and find out what people need. And what came out of that survey was that they felt the number one need was a safe place for teens to do something on the weekend. So out of that, they came up with this Friday night. I think at the time, I don't remember what it was called, but this was before I arrived. It was a Friday night program that would be open. The church would be open from 8 until 10, or maybe it was 7 to 10. They had volunteers from the church to work. You would have almost like a band or something that would come out and play. You had a cafe. You had games, game rooms, different things like that. You had a gym. The main sanctuary was like a multi-purpose facility. It was a gym. And so students would be hooping, hanging out. And when I did Can't Come and I took over that ministry, when I was there, we had 200 plus youth that would be there on a Friday night. And so it was really, I would say to the volunteers, we're going to be a safe place with a safe face. And by this time, I was starting to learn about trauma. And I had a friend who had worked in the Saginaw, Michigan.
Hey, okay, and, come on, y'all.
He had worked with gangs there, and he was kind of giving me some insight. And John Mixak was his name. And he began to talk to me about what it meant to have healthy relationships to help youth ease up We did all kind of studies. But anyway, what we saw happen was that these youth would come in and maybe, you ask them how they doing, they'll look at you and be like, yeah, what up? And keep going, do what they're doing. Like, hey, how you doing? I'm all right. You wouldn't say nothing. And my volunteers would kind of be like, yo, what's up with these kids? They need to learn some respect. And it was like, no, listen, we don't know. You know what I mean? They've been in school all day, all week. That's the most stressful time of their lives. They got so many rules they got to follow, so they just tight.
Yeah.
Right.
Just let them be. But we found out, like, after a couple of weeks, after a month or so, those students would loosen up. And then they come and approach you and tell you about their lives.
Yeah.
And so for me, it became, let's not only care about their souls, but let's care about their life. You know what I mean? Because I think that's what Jesus modeled. He wasn't like, you didn't hear Jesus necessarily saying, well, what do we got to do to get you into heaven right now?
Yeah.
His question, he seemed to actually care about people and what they were experiencing.
Right.
And so this church really modeled for me what incarnational ministry looked like, gave me an opportunity to do that, and really caring about people before you try to you're only concerned about the immaterial parts of their life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, man. I love that. That's great because it's like, it's almost like, but one of the things I was writing down, because, I'm a note taker when we get to go, I'm like, oh, that's good. Let me put these notes. But like, yeah, people, like a lot of the times, the way it sometimes can feel is like the church is removed from the community that is like engaging with, and this was like more organic. Like, it'd be great. Like the volunteers or folks who were there, it's like they were at the after school and doing the multi-complex and sports and whatnot, but they probably saw him at the gas station. You see him at the corner store. You might see him.
Absolutely.
That's
right.
like that, and that creates this community space where it's like, oh yeah, I know. It's different when you only see this person at the church, but when you catch them and you rubbing elbows and you know them, like, that's a different experience, and so that sounds great. Like that really, so that's the type of thing really where you start to build that community and build the trust that folks can actually hear you and listen to you. And like you said, like Jesus wasn't just up on the hill.
Right.
He was out. He was in the mix.
Right.
He was outside.
And I love it because it's not performative.
Right.
Like there are, not speaking of any church in particular, but there have been churches that I've witnessed who will try to look the part and dress like they're young and like say certain words and terms like they're young and youthful and, put people in positions like, oh, they're kind of young, but there is no caretaking toward the person or these kids or even taking stock, like you said, of what are the needs and how can we be helpful for you. It's like they just kind of push what they think is best. And I love that. It's like, yes, be influential, not an influencer.
Yes. And one of the things that I hated was the switch and bait. Or bait and switch, I should say. So they'll be like, hey, let's tell them, and I had to battle this for a while with some of my volunteers. It was like, these students can't be in here. We not preaching to them. We got to tell them the truth. And it's almost as if you feel guilty if I show them too much love without preaching to them, right?
Yeah.
It's like that guilty.
I
got to tell them about Jesus. And I'm all about telling people about Jesus. I just think that there's a way to do it. But it would be to the point where they would want me to let the students in. But before you could go to the gym or do any of the other fun stuff, you got to sit in the service.
Wow.
And that was a point I just said, we can't do that.
Yeah.
I was like, they're going to tune us out anyway.
Yeah.
Or the majority of them are going to come after the service is over and they're going to do what they want. Why not? Let's just be present. Let's not try to bait them to come.
Yeah.
Let them come and let them know we for real.
Right.
We want you to come here and hang.
Yeah.
And then, when students open up after we've developed that relationship, and a common saying that used to say, one of our volunteers used to say it all the time, he would say is, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, talk that.
And and those are real facts. And I can go back to that city. I can go back to Fort Wayne, and I remember one time my wife and I, shout out to my love, Jessica, but I can go back to Fort Wayne and I could sit in a restaurant or somewhere. Somebody come up to me, Pastor G, what's up? I remember that program. We have conversations about it all the time. And, there were lots of students who are following Jesus, who came to follow Jesus. But then there were some who didn't. And so people would be like, well, was it worth the investment? And absolutely it was, you know. My goal was not to get an instant conversion right now. My goal was to love them where they were and where they were at, to let them know that there was somebody who cared. And there's so many other things that affects that I believe that is fruitful.
Right.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
So, yeah, I love that.
Right.
Like, I'm caring about the person first.
Yeah.
Like, you care about you, and that's going to not being performative, right? This is what this really is about. There's no agenda here. It's like you being who you are. That's value. Right. You know, and I think I love what you did with saying, no, we're not gonna make them come in here and like go through this service first, and then they can't come in if they don't. Because at the end of the day, it's about them. Like, we're trying to help them and give them a space where they can be and be safe and let loose. And like you said, they might be at school or whatever else all week, and this is the place where they can come and finally have a space where they feel seen and valued and esteemed. Like, yeah, I love that. I love that.
Plant seeds in that way. And then, you know how people say you don't always remember every detail of every experience, but you'll remember how someone made you feel or how something made you feel. And so when they're going through a difficult time, or maybe when life hits them in a different way as they get older, they're going to remember that.
Yeah.
And that can easily draw them right back. Because it's like, oh, yo, those pastors, though, they really held me down. Maybe I should go find myself a spiritual leader. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's so good. Yeah. I remember one time there was... and this person, he wasn't Christian, but he followed a different faith, but he had this presence, right? I remember a while, this might have been, I forgot when this was, we would like go outside and hoop, like we were like hooping, and we would always see this brother, and he was very like at peace. And this, you know, it's people doing all types of stuff who we hooping with, you know what I mean? There's a lot going on in real life, like there's a lot going on. And I remember one person in particular, well, they ain't give you the pass, I won't shout out their name, but one person in particular had asked him, like, man, how you always so, like, chill? How you always like that? Like, well, let me tell you. And he gave him his rundown, you know, he's like, this is why. Like, my belief is bigger than just me, or this is what's going on. And he actually, like, from him just being how he was and who he was and being present, he actually invited multiple people to, like, come and hear, you know what I mean? Like, welcome out to that space. And I think a lot of times it's just modeling what that is, you know, like, if you truly believe what you say you believe, like that's gonna come off. It's gonna come in how you you walk and like indeed, you know what I mean, in action. And that's, I think, a lot of the times what some of the youth we're speaking about are looking at. Right. Like they want to know, they watching you. Like, okay, what's going on with you? Is it real? Is it tangible? This might sound good in the book, but how's it play out in your life? You know what I mean? Yeah. And then so if you embody that and create that space, I think that's gonna invite so many people in different ways. You know? Yeah. So. Yeah, that's good. And I did want to talk about this, though. So post-pandemic, and I don't remember, you actually inspired this question a long time ago. I don't know if you remember. Yeah. I remember this. Oh, snap, where this going? No, but you had mentioned about like post-pandemic. I actually, like, this is right after I left Roberts Wesleyan University now. And you had mentioned, like, post-pandemic, there's like some hurt and trauma in the community or in the culture that's there, and like making that spiritual connection in that. I don't know if you used the word difficult at the time, but I interpret it as that, like, you know, there's some hurt there that needs to be mended, right? Yeah. And I'm wondering specifically around like what I still always call a racial reckoning,
Yes,
you know?
Yes.
And it's like, how have you, like post-pandemic, post George Floyd's murder, like, how have you experienced that, or, you know, as a pastor, or someone who's connecting to people on a spiritual level, you know, how have you seen maybe the difference or the shift with that being connected to COVID, where community is different, you know? I know that's a loaded question, but just wondering how you've experienced it or seen it.
Wow. So, man, I got so many thoughts, and you got a good memory. So there's one, I feel like, and let me talk about it in terms, I know that Christians would say the church is not divided. Right. But for cultural reasons, we talk about the black church, and then we talk about the white church, or specific cultural context. But let me say, especially in these contexts that are diverse. Now, so I've pastored, the church I pastored at in Fort Wayne, and then I pastored at in Detroit. They were both culturally diverse, predominantly white-led, but culturally diverse. which means that, okay, black people are welcome. And a lot of times a lot of young black families come to these churches, or black families come in general, is because they don't feel so much traditional. You know, you get to dress down, wear what you want. Nobody's going to holler at you. Like, God said, get it right. You know, no, you won't get all of that.
Yeah.
And then you feel like, hey, you just welcome. You know, you can drink your coffee and chew your donut in service. And you ain't going to hell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's funny.
But also then there's a lot of good teaching. You know, some good teaching. And not that we don't have that in our black context. Not that we don't have that. I want to be sure to say that. But occasionally what would happen is like, man, can we get a little gospel music? You know, or I miss some preaching.
Yeah.
Or if something would happen in society, George Floyd, something of that nature, you would feel like you would wait. Are they going to say something about this? You know?
Yeah.
Because as a church, you're looking for pastoral care that cares about the whole of your life.
Yes.
And sometimes when you're in a predominantly white institution or a church, that particular pastor may not know how to speak to those issues.
Right.
Or you just don't know what a song, old spiritual song that you sing in the black church, how that ministers to the struggle that you face, you know?
Yeah.
Or even teaching wise, like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time this one guy said to me, he was like, oh my God. But he said to me,
oh Lord.
He said, you know how your people sing sometimes, God gonna fix it. He says, God just don't fix it. You know, God just don't put a rubber band on stuff. No, God likes to take it apart and put it together. And I was like, wait. I said, stop for a second here. I said, you know, there's a lot that you're missing out of this context, right? And what you find is like people there's another song. I wish I could think of it right now. Lord, give it to me. But anyway, there's songs that when they talk about faith in God, because they might not be in a day-to-day struggle, it's about faith in Jesus that he can save your soul. There's a song, He Made a Way. So there's a song that says, He made a way. And then you get to a part and it's like, I don't know how, but he did it. And this particular Christian who was white, they made the remark, we do know how he did it. He did it on the cross. And there was a gap there of like, no.
Right.
See, you don't know what it's like to have a bill due.
Yeah.
And you don't know where the money gonna come from.
And then found a way. And then he made a way.
Yes.
He made a way.
Every time, yo.
Yeah. So, you know, when we say things like, won't he do it?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
We're not just looking at what Christ has done on the cross for us, but we're looking for God. We need you today,
Right
now,
in this moment.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes there's that gap. But with the pandemic, and all of the things that happened, not only the pandemic, but just in the cases of police brutality, just the injustices all around the world, it was as if Black folks in predominantly white institutions says, we've been waiting for y'all to speak to this.
Yeah.
And y'all can't do it.
Yeah.
And you won't do it.
Yeah.
And we tired of it.
Ooh.
Where I've seen a lot of white pastors who have tried to.
Yeah.
And I've seen some of them who did well, but from their vantage point, it's like, we are. Don't you see how much we've done? And for us, we like, look, we've been dealing with this for years.
Come on now.
You know, it's not enough.
Yeah.
And so I think you've seen some people who've pulled all the way out of those contexts.
Yeah.
And now they're stuck.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I want to go home. I'd like to go back to the Black church.
Yeah.
But how do I say this respectfully? This is not all context.
Yeah. Now we feel you, brother. We talk open here. Yeah. We figuring it out.
But then have leaders adapted to allow those younger believers to interpret what church looks like and community looks like in their day.
Yes.
And so have you allowed young leaders to say, hey, these are some of the things that we want to talk about, or these are some of the things that we want to address, or what does it look like for us? And so there are many people now who are like, I don't want to go back to, I'm not going back to white church.
Right.
And then it's like, I don't want to go back to anybody yelling at me.
Right.
Or talking to me like an overbearing parent.
Criticizing.
I don't want to hear that either. Don't tell me what I gotta wear. I don't want to hear it. Better yet, you know what? I just be at the crib.
Yes.
You know? And it's a lot it's a lot easier to be at the crib.
Yeah.
Nail on the head, Pastor
Knocking
G.
that out the park, G.
That is it.
But yeah, those are some of the things. And I think even when I stepped off of a staff of a church and went to Roberts, it was such a breather to be like, ooh. I ain't gotta be in nobody's church on Sunday. You know, that's a transparent moment, because from my angle, you know, there's a lot, you know, to do, and just having my family always there and around, and sometimes trying to balance that of, you know, so it's just, there's just a lot of things.
That's real.
That's so real. And it's like this, that is a real experience that I never actually even thought about in words like that.
Yes,
right? And
like
that's,
literally.
That's an experience and a trauma. Like, and so it's like you're in the spaces and you're with somebody who might take the time but can't fully understand you versus being in a space where someone won't take the time to understand you.
Yes.
And it's like, because, and that's the duality. Like, that's the battle, right? Like, in this space, I could come in. I might come in chilling in my jeans. Like, come as you are, really mean that. I got my coffee and my donuts. Like, I'm chilling. And I get to experience the Lord, like, at my own pace, in my own circle. And it's like, it's out here for me to find it. That's great. But it's like, but even with that, there's something missing from a cultural context that just won't get me. So you might take the time, but you can't understand me. And then option, you know, really, it's like I go here and it's like there's this space where I'm not allowed to find my own voice or take my own journey, right? Yeah. And I think some of that comes from what it go always circle all the way back, what folks experience and why I think us as a culture, Black community in general, was able to connect to faith so deeply was all of the traumas on the outside. Like, here's what you need to believe. We don't know how much time you got left. And when you walk out of here, this is what's going to happen. Like, this is, you have to get this now. We don't have time to let you find it. You got to find it now. That's the truth. And it's like, that I had never thought of it in that way, but that hit me viscerally.
Makes perfect sense. It's like, oh my gosh, this is my struggle. This is exactly what I've been dealing with, because trying to reach back to what I know, you know the Lord is real. Like that, you know what I mean? Absolutely. Like, that's my life. I know that to be real, but going back doesn't feed me the same way. And I'm like, I am starving. I can't eat. And so you're trying to talk to the elders, and they see it from a different perspective. We are in different generations. And I've tried to say that what you need right now does not look the same as what I need. And you trying to like help me isn't helpful. You know, it's full of the criticisms and you're not praying enough. You're not reading the Bible enough. It's like there's a lack of understanding. And I think people forget that the pandemic has changed the trajectory of so much. And so you see a lot more after effects now than you did when it first happened. The mental health rise is so insane right now. And it's like that spiritual component is missing. Like the church is nowhere to be found. And a lot of it I see is they don't want to be politicized. Like, no one wants to choose a camp or say something that's wrong I don't want to offend. And then, you know, Black churches sometimes want to offend and will just say anything. It's like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I think we've just been missing the mark so much nowadays. I love how you said thank you.
I see. Ooh, that was like church therapy. It hit your soul. Come on,
I am healing in this conversation. It's like, Lord, I thank you.
I'm with you in that. Like, it's a lot, you know? And I think that, like, and I feel like, too, I've been wrestling with this, traveling back to Chicago and leading the church I grew up in. It's thinking, okay, what are the parts about this that are right? The community, the family, you know, and even the mother, you know, saying, baby, come here, you know, there's so much affirmation in that. You know what I mean? And it's just like, what are those things that we need to keep but then what are the elements that need to change? And, you're just wrestling with that. And I know some people see it as compromise, and it's just like, no, we've got to ask these hard questions. And I think sometimes, and I know this, and it's funny because I see the generation younger than I am, and they'll say, we just want to talk about it. Can we talk about it? And sometimes to the older generation, to talk about it and to even concede the possibility that I might be wrong and I might have mishandled something, that's tough, That's hard to do.
That's hard to do.
But to even facilitate that and just to say, no, we need to talk about it. And we need to be real, and understand it. So,
So that actually gets to what I was going to ask. Do you think about how do we start to mend that, and what's the church's role in starting to mend kind of like that dissonance there, right? So you think starting to be open to those different perspectives of dialogue, or what would you say is kind of a path forward?
Yeah, I think number one, you got to be open, and then I think for the church to maintain a posture of humility, of like,
I'm write that down.
Let's own our mistakes.
Yes.
I think there's a story in the Old Testament with David. Somebody curses him, and somebody goes to defend, and David's like, no, that person has a right to say that, And I think for the church, all of the bad stuff that we hear, whether it's true of our particular congregation or not, we got to just say, hey, what do we have to lose by just fessing up?
Right.
Yeah.
That we've got some things wrong. Or even recognizing, I heard this one pastor say once, he says, although I'm a shepherd, I realize that I'm not Jesus.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, I'm a sheep with the staff, with the
Yes.
shepherd's staff,
Ooh.
And so I think recognizing that for the church and church leaders really who are the face for the church to have a posture of humility, say, look, there's a lot that we've gotten wrong.
Yeah.
There's some ways that we've abused our power.
Yeah.
And there's some ways that we have not understood or we haven't, so I think instead of just trying to maintain why you are right, let's just talk.
Yeah.
You don't have anything to lose by just saying, first of all, let's come in the same space. Let's have this healthy dialogue and let's talk. And let me learn just as much as I expect you to learn.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I hear that. Like keeping that humanity and recognizing that I too am a human who makes mistakes and mess up and have struggles and go through similar things. Because I've seen a lot of, hiding almost behind the Christianity veil and, acting like we're perfect when we know you're not perfect, but for you to treat me like I am such a failure or I'm in such a state of, oh my gosh, how could you? As if your past is not full of skeletons as well. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's so common. It's like it's regular stance now. I'm now an evangelist. I am a deaconess. I am a deacon. I'm whatever you are. All of a sudden, the veil closes and I'm better than you. Yeah. So I agree.
No, that's good. I think you said the posture of humility was great because I almost, and that's why we were talking about this earlier. Kind of, I think you mentioned it, like the kind of the conversation of, well, the world will tell you, or even the word like the secular or like that. To me, that's like divisive in nature to me. And it's like, and that always was tough for me because it's like, well, when we get done here, I go out to that world.
Right.
Those are people who are that's family and friends. And so it was hard. And I think that type of posture creates, like, it's hard to be, you can't be humble in that posture. And you almost are separating yourself from, and you're elevating yourself away from other people.
We're elite.
And that, I think that is what, it's hard to come to the table and have some of those healing, reconciliation conversations with people, even though in our own community, when that's the posture. So that culture of humility, so like that's really, that posture of humility was like great. Like that's really where I think it's great to start. But any other thoughts around that? Like, what are some steps forward? What you think?
What do I think? I agree with Pastor G. I think that is probably the first step. I also think taking that pulse check, like you said, like checking in with what is needed, because I think because the church now is so removed, they don't really know what is needed by the people in the community anymore. You know what I mean? Like you could see on TV, you could like see it in the streets, but you don't feel it the same because of that division. I think if almost like how you said the Nation of Islam used to go out in the hoods so much. I wish evangelism had looked like that or can be that now.
Yes.
Because it's never looked like that. I've never seen it that way. I've seen the pamphlets and take this and do you know the Lord? And, you know, like aggressively, I mean, I'm from New York City, so like aggressively
Oh, it was on you.
the
It's like, hey,
streets.
take this.
Yes, I literally used to have to say, I'm a Christian. I'm saved.
Yeah.
So they would leave me alone.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, rough, or just, you know, people coming onto the train and just preaching at you. But never have I really seen anyone who loves God and just speaks to you like a person, treats you like a person, has a regular conversation, or just gives without feeling like they have to tell you what you need to be doing. I think going back to just treating people as people and like filling a need when you see it is step 2.
And that's the foundation. Like that's a church foundation. Like those are things that, especially if you go back. So it's not like this is a foreign concept.
Right.
That was a part of it.
Right.
Like those were the folks. We talked about people who were in the community and organic. Like like the folks who we look at, the ones who are well known and then not known as much, like the messiahs of kind of like the black, I would say black church, and then also cultural movement back in the time. Like that was the philosophy because it had to be. Those were the folks. Like you saw them at the grocery store. They was living every day. You go, hey, how's it going, Mr. King?
But they knew you too. You know what I mean? There was that personal connection as well. And you find it harder now, especially those large churches. They don't know who you are. You're like, my pastor is like, you're just a person, get away from me. You know what I mean? It's like, yes.
And that's what I said. That's not a foreign concept. And there are places that do it and do it well. It's just that to be, I think, a part of the fabric, right?
100.
You know?
100. You know, I got this story. So when we were living in Fort Wayne, there was a project by the city to rebuild homes in the city, to build new homes.
Yeah.
But to do it in such a way as to prevent gentrification. So we were new to Fort Wayne, and so we was like, you know what, let's look and see. Oh, we qualify. We can.
Yeah.
And so we moved into that area, and it was the southeast side of Fort Wayne, considered to be the poorest, the least educated, but the most diverse.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there used to be these memes with the Lion King and with Simba and Mufasa. Mufasa is telling him, Simba, you must never go to these lands. You know, people used to joke about it like that. But we were living there, and I remember it was after our kids would play, and you know, the kids would always come down to our yard, and my wife and I are really not thinking about this time of where we are, but we're living in the hood. We got a trampoline in the backyard. The kids all converge to our yard to play. Then our second oldest daughter, she comes into the house one day and she says, Mom and Dad, I got a question. I was like, yeah, what's your question? And she was like, all the kids in our neighborhood, they either live with a grandparent or a foster parent. We're the only one that got a mommy and daddy in the home. And you could see she was just like, this was bothering her. And we just had to talk about, you know, how some of the things that happen and how these are good things and affirm them. But then after that conversation, it forced me and my wife to have another conversation. Like, wait a minute, like, how are we positioning ourselves in this community? Like, we might be the only marriage that these kids will see. And so then it caused us to, at that moment, learn from that experience, and then it gave me context. When I see these kids come into my house, this is an opportunity to love them well, right? And not necessarily put my family up on a pedestal, but then it just made, okay, things that I have been given by God, I need to share. And so it led this kind of philosophy, like, okay, if we're living here, we're going to be present in this community. This can't just be at church, right? It's got to be here. And so, when, you know, I used to get irritated because they'd be like, Mr. Coleman, my mama said that we could stay here, we could eat dinner with y'all. I'm like, who is your mama? And where you live at, and why she say that?
Is she paying for the food, man? Does she got the what? Does that come with some groceries?
Because I'm super boundaries oriented.
Yeah.
But then after that, it was just like, nah, you know what?
Yeah.
Let's do what we can.
Yeah.
And so we've seen a lot of positive things like that too. I think so in reality too, let's understand what church is for It's the people gathered together.
Yeah.
But it really should impact how we live
Yes.
apart, because another part of the pandemic is if you can't get to church,
Right.
what does that is your faith really real then? You know what I mean? Or is church about the facade and you only holy when you walk into the doors, or do your people know you? You know what I mean? And so it's it's a lot of things, but
that is a phenomenal, lovely example of like exactly what we're talking about, of like being present.
Yeah.
Like you said, what is church really for, right? Like, what is that space for?
Right.
And then how does that continue outside? Like, and those connections that you made, with all the kids in the neighborhood, like you continue to build that. Like so if they were to come to church,
they know who you are.
That's Mr. Conway. We on the trampoline all the time. Like, it's just different. It's a whole different mindset, right? Being embedded. Yeah. I love that. It's not removed,
Yep.
So go ahead.
And I was gonna say not to give them a track either. You know what I mean? Like those little pamphlets.
Yes.
Right.
So my question is, young man, I really care about you. Where are you gonna go if you die in your sleep tonight?
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
those
don't set them up.
Were scary. Oh my gosh! And I read them all, fearful. I promise you, the level of fear that would be like in me because I grew up in that kind of environment, terrified every night. I was like, I'm not gonna wake up.
Same though. I think that's a lot of part of the thing. I used to do that too. I'm like, all right, if I go sleep, dang, did I repent? If I got one sin on my record, it's a wrap.
Yes.
Nah, that's real.
And they were comics for me and my brothers. We'd be like, yo, we leave them in the bathroom.
That's great.
But it's we got a lot of work.
And we can do it. Like, that's the thing, is like that can be done in so many different spaces, and not to compete. Like, it's not even like to pit up against. You mentioned the Nation. That's heavy in Detroit. That's I actually appreciate and value, and like we need because of what you call. We need that. Like that's how I feel. It's like the same way we are needed, right? Like as individuals, the same way the church is needed. Like that is important. So a lot of work to do can be done alongside these other folks who are doing amazing work. And I guess I would ask too, any last, before we get up out of here, any last like thoughts or things you would leave people with as they're dealing with navigating some of the things we talked about today?
That's a good question. I'm looking at you like,
Come drop the mic with me.
More recently, I have been in conversations with people around my age who've grown up similarly and are seeking that type of spiritual food, and recognizing that what we grew up in is not healthy for us mentally, and that we can't just fake it or just go anywhere. So I would say I encourage those who are in that same boat to talk to one another, to like find that healing and commonality, and hopefully prayerfully that leads to a deepening in your faith, but also like a path of where you should go, or even what you create together.
Love that.
I'm in full agreement. I see, as people may look at me sideways for being a pastor and saying this, but I don't see anything wrong with people getting together who are on the similar journey. Get together at a home. Instead of maybe going to the church on a Sunday morning, get together in your home. Get your families together, friends get together, have some food, whatever, do brunch together. Maybe read something together, listen to something, whether it be a Bible verse, whether it be a podcast or preacher, and dialogue about it. You know what I mean? And I think that's the piece that's missing. Like, I don't want to go to a building and just be a number. But I really want to do something that's going to help me to grow, and then something that's going to hold me accountable. And, and being a part of a community where you pray for one another, you journey with one another, one of you sick, you can all take care of, you know what I mean? Those are the type of, that's the essence of what a church is, a spiritual community. And I think as you all journey together, then, it's a safe space, right? To get what you need in that moment. And sometimes you do have to be selfish and say, what do I need? Because I won't be helpful to anybody else until I help myself. And I know for me especially, like, there are moments where I have to be selfish. Because if I'm not, I'll lose what I need. I'll lose what I want and what somebody else needs and wants. And so I think in this time, it's just a good time for people to get centered in themselves again. Really think about what they need, and find healthy ways to pursue that
Mm-hmm.
until maybe you can enter back into another context. That's what I would say.
No, that's
Great.
amazing. Yeah, that's good.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say?
Yeah, all of that. I think first, like, giving permission. First, so there's like different categories of folks who need different kinds of information right now, right? And I think
Yes.
this is why I was so good that this conversation was so diverse, but also like similar. Like we had these things that connected us, but we experienced different. It's great. So I think one, give yourself permission to be on a space of like self-discovery. You know, like that was big for me. I talked about that. I was at Roberts. You did like the panel conversation. I said, yeah, that was big for me. Was self-discovery, like finding my own faith journey was huge. Like what that meant to me was important. So that's how I feel like on an individual level. And then to like the establishment, so like the church itself, is kind of what we said. Like how can we really work towards finding out where people are, and then meeting them there, right? So then figure out what people need. And I love the story what you explained, which was how can we actually care about the person, for like person first, because that's what I saw Jesus actually do. Like if you as a human, you know what I mean? And then people willingly was like, oh, cool, I'll follow. And like just the story about having like the multi-complex where folks can come play sports and do different things. Like, you feel valued.
Yeah.
Like, how can we get to that? Like, that be the center point of what we do. Like, value people, because people need that.
Yes.
And the line, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like, let's think about that and put that first. Like,
Preach.
and then go there. So, yeah, that was, man, this was like fulfilling. I'm fed. You told you were starving.
I tell you, I'm healing.
Yeah.
This was so healing. I
This really
appreciate it.
was. Yeah.
Yes.
And you definitely, so her and I were having like offer conversations about our spirituality and a journey, and you talking about, man, the experience of what happened to folks who are in like racially diverse churches, and it's like, man, I don't get everything I need here, but then I go back and that was, I'm like, oh, that put in the words everything we've been trying to say.
Literally.
Yeah. So thank you, brother.
Yes.
We appreciate
Welcome.
you.
It's an honor to be here. Thank y'all for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, this was great. And people probably listening right now like, what in the world are they talking about? Listen, y'all, we might be right.
We might be wrong.
But at the end of the day,
we just young, black, and figuring it out.
Tough.